You were listening to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. This is episode number 37, and I am your host, Curtis, Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike. This week we're going to be talking about power. We're going to be talking about the Hall of Science Amateur Radio Club in Queens, New York. We got some news coming up. We're going to talk about a giveaway, discount codes, and several other things. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Everything Ham Radio podcast. My name is Curtis, my call sign is Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike, and I am your host for this podcast. This podcast is released every Thursday morning. You can find all the links and the additional information about this episode in the show notes that you can find at everythinghamradio.com /podcast /37. That's the number 37. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com /everythinghamradio, YouTube at youtube.com /everythinghamradio, and on Twitter at Kilo 5 Charlie Lima Mike. That's K5CLA. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, like I said, we're going to be talking about power. And by power, I mean what type of lost my train of thought already. That's not good. But we're going to be talking about things like power cords, what type of wire to use for different instances, how to connect to batteries for mobile installations, stuff like that is basically what we're going to be talking about. But first off, I want to talk a little bit of something else. I want to thank everybody that emailed me this past week. I guess you got 3 different emails. 2 of them were great, one of them not so much. For those 2 that sent me one that was, saying great job, they really loved it. To me, that's awesome. Those are the kind of emails that I like to get. The third one, on the other hand, it wasn't so nice. And I know that there's going to be those type of people out there that are going to give bad feedback, and I accept that. And some of the stuff that this person said in the email were probably true. And I mean, because I know that sometimes this happens. Basically, what he was talking about was that in the last episode, I used a lot of likes and ums. Well, you know what? I'm sorry to this person that sent me this email, and if you're listening to this, you know who you are. I'm sorry. But you know what? It happens. And I'm not going to write a script for my podcast and read it word for word because that gets boring. That is not real life. That is not how you talk. That is not how you teach. I mean, when you go into a classroom, is there a person? Is the teacher up there holding a piece of paper saying word for word of what it is? I mean, how many times have you been to a class where the person that's teaching the class either reads PowerPoint presentations word for word or books word for word, and that's how they teach? Me, I've had that a lot. And do I learn a lot of stuff? No, I don't. But things happen, and sometimes, yeah, okay, I'll lose a train of thought, or I'll try to find some information that I thought I had but I didn't, and I say stuff like that. I say like, or I say I'm sorry. Guess what? We're all human. We're all hams. But this person, not only did he insult me, but he insulted all of y'all. And by that, his subject of his email is a dumb blank trying to teach other dumb blanks. I'll let you fill in the blanks. And the very first thing that he said was, I listened to your latest podcast and I feel dumber now than I did before I listened to it. I'm all for constructive criticism. I'm all for letting me know when I do something wrong. But if you're going to do something like that, people, don't start it off like that. Do constructive criticism. Don't be a dumb blank and talk like this to somebody. Don't don't tell people, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, but you did this because you're a dumb blank and you're trying to teach dumb blanks. I'm sorry, but those type of people are out there. Yes, I understand that. They are everywhere, and even in this hobby, and that's sad for me. But if you can't do it in a nice way or a constructive way, don't even bother saying it because it's just going to come back to bite you in the butt. So, to this person, and like I said, you know who you are, I'm not going to tell all of y'all, the rest of my listeners, this person's name or his call sign, but he was a ham, I'm assuming. Maybe not, because he didn't include a call sign, and he said that not everyone were hams. So, anyways, that's my rant.
Okay, so now that that's done and over with, and I've got that out of my system, um, let's talk a little bit about the giveaway. Um, Being that the giveaway was only announced like 2 days ago as of the time of this recording, I think I'm going to extend it just a little bit. I originally said that I was going to announce it in this episode, but being that I'm recording this episode on Saturday the 24th and it doesn't go out until the 29th, that only gave like 2 days for people to enter the raffle, and that's just not very fair. So I'm going to extend it, and I'm going to say that the deadline to enter the raffle is going to be on the 30th. So the end of the month, September 30th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So um, if you're wanting to enter the raffle for the Nanuck 904 case, simply send an email to K5CLM at everythinghamradio.com, and in the subject line put Nanuk, Nanuk, and put your name and call sign at least in the body of the message. So again, send an email, K5CLM at everythinghamradio.com, with Nanuck in the subject line and your name and call sign if you have one in the body by September 30th, 2016 at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So please enter it. These are awesome cases. And even if you don't enter the raffle, or if you do enter the raffle, but you don't want to take the risk of not winning the case, but you still want one, or if you want a second one, super easy to get. All you got to do is head on over to gigaparts.com, find the case that you want, and at checkout, enter the coupon code of EHR10, and you will get $10 or 10% off of your purchase of your Nanut case. This is only for the case, not for your total purchase, but for the Nanut case, you'll get 10% off. So head on over to gigaparts.com now and find your case before time runs out. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the topic of today. Like I said, it is on power cords. So, the majority of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be geared more towards your mobile radio installation. However, that being said, all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about can be used in a base station or home station environment. There's a few little things that you ain't got to worry about when you're talking about a home station, but for the most part, it's generally the same. So, first off, in mobile radio installation here, okay, where do you hook the power? The power cords to themselves. You always want to hook your hot wire directly to the hot terminal of your battery. You don't want to go through the fuses or the fuse boxes or a cigarette lighter plug or anything like that. You always want to go directly to the hot side of the battery. Now, on the negative side of the battery is a little different. Do not go to the negative terminal on your battery. Do not. You want to connect to the chassis where your negative wire that comes from your battery connects to. And the reason behind this is because nowadays in vehicles, you will have what's called a battery monitoring system that monitors the battery or the voltage of your battery, the requirements of your electrical system. Like, for example, when your AC gets turned on, more power is required. So it does all the monitoring of it and adjusts the power sent through your system accordingly. And typically, this monitor is installed between your negative terminal on your battery and the chassis ground. So you want to bypass that with the grounding of your equipment. But you also want to make sure that you hook it to the same spot as where everything else on your vehicle is grounded, so you don't cause a ground loop. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the possibilities that here in a little bit when we talk about some high power needs and stuff like that. So when you do this though, when you are hooking up your radio equipment and you have to disconnect your uh, terminal, potentially some vehicles have an extra lug or something like that that you can undo and hook your wire to it. But if you actually have to take your or disconnect your battery totally, there are some potential drawbacks to doing that. One of which is an easy fix. A lot of times your anti-theft device on your car stereo will require you to put in a 4-digit code or something like that. And a lot of times you can find that in your user manual. And it's just a way to keep your stereo from being used if it's stolen, is what that's for. I had, I think, one radio in all the vehicles that I've had that actually happened. Another potential side effect of disconnecting your battery, or what could possibly happen when you disconnect your battery, is it affect the starting system of your car. How often this happens, I don't know, and potentially it's probably just going to be on your higher end vehicles. But there is some cases, and I believe it's especially with BMWs. So if you own a BMW, make sure you check this before you install your radio. But it will affect your starting system, where your vehicle won't start after you disconnect your battery, and you might have to have your vehicle towed to the dealership or to your mechanic to have them reprogram your computer to allow your car to start. So always check and make sure that you know exactly what is going to happen when you disconnect your battery. So now that we know that, what kind of wire do you use? Now, selecting the type of the correct gauge of wire for your installation is very, very, very important. It's probably the most important thing about the whole installation. You want to make sure that you know how many amperage or how much amperage your entire system is going to draw. So if you have, let's just say, a dual band VHF UHF mobile radio, and that's the only thing that you're going to have. Okay. A typical 50-watt radio draws about 11 amps. And if that's the only thing that you have on your equipment setup, then you don't need as big a wire. You could probably get by with like I believe like a 14 gauge wire. I wouldn't go any lower than that. And it also depends on how far it is uh, from your battery. So I am going to include a chart in the show notes of today's episode on uh, how much it's like has how much amperage along the top, how long of distance you're going to be running along the side, and then it has a graph on which size wire to use. So if you're, say you have a 20-foot run from your battery to the inside of your car, and you're going to be using 11 amps for your radio, for your one radio, then you need at least a 10 gauge wire, maybe 12. So 14 is probably pushing it. If you drop down to say 10 foot or less than 6 foot, then 14 gauge wire is plenty. But you always want to go up a little bit rather than down a little bit. So if you have, if say 15 foot of wire and 10 amps is what you need, and this graph that I have says it requires a 12 gauge wire, you don't want to go down to a 14 gauge wire. You always want to go up to a 10 gauge wire if there's a potential of adding something later, or not knowing exactly how much amperage you're going to have. So you always want to go up. And the reason behind this is that with the different gauge wires have a different amount of resistance and therefore cause heat when power flows through it. So if you have a smaller wire and more amps, your wire is going to get hot, and that could lead to disaster. And I'm actually going to talk about that here a little bit later, so I'm not going to go into it real deep here. But so if you're looking at like a 100-watt radio, like an HF radio, it typically takes about 22 amps. And these numbers that I'm talking about are the peak amperage that your radio is going to draw. I'm not talking about the average. You don't want to go by the average. And the reason behind that is if you go by the average and say the average draw is 5 amps on a 100-watt radio or 7 amps, something like that, and you install a 14 gauge wire, and then all of a sudden, you start talking, you're transmitting at 100 watts, you're carrying on a QSO with your best friend, and it lasts for 30 minutes, those wires are going to get really hot, and they could potentially cause a fire. So always want to go with your higher gauge wires. So along with those 100-watt radios, a lot of times you'll see people that'll have multiple radios in their car, or they'll have an amplifier in their car, and all that takes power. A typical amplifier could take anywhere between like 25 amps all the way up to like 45 amps. So not only do you have your amplifier that's going to take up to 45 amps, you have your 100-watt radio that's going to take 22 amps, and then you probably are going to have VHF radio or something like that. So that's another 11 amps. So you're looking at, potentially 75 amps that you're going to be drawing. So you're going to need a nice sized wire. On top of that, though, you're probably going to need another battery, because the battery in your car probably is not going to handle the power output needed, or the amperage output needed to run your equipment efficiently. So installing a second battery is a good way to go. Now, if you're able to get it under your hood, good luck. A lot of times they're put in like a trunk of a car. If your vehicle is a car, if it's a truck, then you're probably going to have to try and find some place to put it under the hood of your truck. Now, if you are looking at something like this and you are going to have multiple radios, actually, let me back up here a little bit. With your second battery, okay, you are going to have to take some special considerations with that. You will need to use a very high gauge wire, like at least a 4 gauge wire, potentially a 2 gauge wire if the run is over 20 feet. So either a 2 or a 4 gauge wire, and you're also going to need to protect that wire with a 60 amp fuse. The negative side of your battery also needs to be hooked up to the grounding point of the primary battery in your car. This is so that you bypass that battery monitoring system. Again, you don't want to add the extra battery capacity, because then stuff could happen to your computer and it costs a whole lot of money to get fixed. So always ground it to where your primary battery is grounded. If you ground it close to where the second battery is that you installed, you can cause a feedback loop. You can cause a ground loop, I guess maybe is the word I'm looking for. I don't know, Can't think of it off the top of my head what I'm trying to think of, but it's basically like that. Basically, the ground will go over the chassis and cause some interference with your transmissions. So always want to make sure that you ground at the same place for everything in your car. On top of an extra battery or higher gauge wire, there's also a way to like have multiple radios powered off of one central point so that you can save on the higher gauge wire. And you do this by doing some type of power distribution block. And a really awesome system is made by West Mountain Radio, I believe what they're called. And they're called Rig Runners. And I'll have a link to them in the show notes so you can buy them. Both from West Mountain Radio and also from Amazon through my affiliate code. Now, when you're using a thing like a rig runner or some sort of power distribution block, there's a couple things that you can do differently. You do need to have a higher grade or higher gauge power cord coming from your battery. It still hooks up the same way. The positive side to the positive side of the battery, the negative side or the black side connected to your chassis ground where your battery's negative terminal is connected to. But after that, it kind of changes. The power cord that goes from your battery to the rig runner doesn't necessarily need to be fused because the rig runner has the fuses built in into each individual output spot. You can put it in there, but being that you're going to be using a high gauge wire, like a potentially a 4 or 2 gauge wire, you're going to have a hard time finding fuses for it, and those that you do are going to be pretty expensive. So you don't necessarily have to have a fuse in there for it for your rig runner, but you can put it in there. You take your wire from your battery to your rig runner, and then your rig runner can have 2 output spots. It can have, I believe, up to like 10 or 12 output spots. And you can even daisy chain them if I'm not mistaken. And then each output that the rig runner has a individual fuse for that output. And it's 10, 20, 40, whatever amp fuse that you need, and that's what you connect to your radio. From your rig runner to your radio, it's going to be a short run, say 5-6 feet, something like that, maybe 10-foot max. And you're only going to have the amperage needed to run that one piece of equipment. So instead of having a 20-foot run for each piece of equipment that's in your vehicle, you have a mobile radio, you have a HF radio, you have a laptop, you have whatever. Each one of those would have to have say a 10 gauge wire or 12 gauge wire coming from your battery if you ran them individually. But instead of doing that, take a 2 or a 4 gauge wire to your rig runner, and then you can take a short 6-foot piece of wire that you can run on, say, like a 14 gauge wire or a 12 gauge wire even, and go from your rig runner to your radio. So it's going to be a whole lot easier to go through those hard to reach areas and stuff like that. So that's one way to do it, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're going to have more than just one piece of equipment or one radio in your car. Okay, so next on my list of talking points is existing wiring. Now, I've been guilty of doing this myself, and in some instances, it's totally understandable and probably even halfway okay to do this, using the existing wire of your vehicle to power your radio. The instances where I can see it being okay to do something like this is if you have, say, a handheld radio that has a cigarette lighter plug power adapter to it, and you're going to be using it, say, for a sag wagon in a bike race or a repair vehicle or something like that, and you're going to be riding along with them. Okay, so you take this handheld with this power cord and you plug it into the accessory port of the cigarette lighter plug, and away you go. The drawback to this is that you have to use a low power because a lot of times these accessory plugs aren't very um, high on amperage. I know the last time that I did something like this, it was like 5 amps or something like that was all they were fused for. So for temporary solutions or emergency situations, absolutely, do something like this with a cigarette lighter plug. The other thing that I've seen people do is go into their fuse panel, and again, I am guilty of this. My first uh, mobile radio that I had while I was in college, I had a 1998 Chevy S10, and I had no idea how to hook it up, how to get power. I didn't know anything about, going through the firewall or going to the battery or, you know, I had the cigarette lighter plug. Actually, I don't think my truck had a cigarette lighter plug, and at the time, it didn't have the um, accessory ports like vehicles do now. So I had to figure out some other way. So I found a radio repair shop, I believe it was. Maybe it was um, a stereo installation place or something, and had them hook up the power. And basically, what they did is they ran the wire to the fuse panel on the inside of the truck, put the wires in front of it, put the hot wire in front of the fuse, and push the fuse down in the fuse block. It worked, but is it the best way to do it? No. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, doing something like that, you can kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. Yes and no. Yes, okay, I can see your thinking on that because you're hooked through the fuse, so you're going to have a fuse connection. Yeah, maybe. And then you don't have to drill through the firewall either. Okay, but again, I would only do that for the short term because that fuse panel or that wiring is really not made to power your equipment. So I would really wouldn't do that. And on top of that, we talked a little bit earlier about connecting to your battery your hot terminal and your battery chassis or your vehicle chassis in the same spot as your vehicle does to bypass the battery monitoring system. If you go through this fuse panel, guess what? You don't bypass that monitoring system. So that could potentially cause problems down the road by uh, causing a check engine light to come on. And this could even happen through the cigarette lighter plug. Your check engine light might come on. You might have some other type of warning light come on. You could have an error message flash on your vehicle information system if your vehicle has that. So it's kind of iffy going like that. Really iffy going through the cigarette lighter plug. So if you're going to have a radio in your vehicle, definitely take the time to plan out how you're going to get power to it and go from there. Okay, so before we go on any further, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we'll come back and finish up this tech corner for this episode. Are you looking for some new radio equipment? Maybe a computer for your ham shack? Or maybe you just need to find that piece from your tower that fell and you need a metal detector. All this and so much more can be found at Gigaparts. So head on over to gigaparts.com and check them out. While you're there, check out the Nana cases. These things are great cases, waterproof and hard plastic cases with soft foam insides that are totally customizable. Check them out. Find one that you like and buy it. At checkout, enter the coupon code of ETH037 for 10% off of your purchase of your Nanite case. So head on over to gigaparts.com right now and check them out. Okay, and we're back. Okay, we are going to continue our topic of today on power. We have talked about fuses a little bit so far in this tech corner, but let's dive a little bit deeper into it. First off, what exactly is a fuse? I'm sure that you probably already have an idea, but I'm going to go ahead and give you what it is anyways. A fuse is basically a short piece of enclosed wire that is designed to melt if it is subjected to a high current. When the wire melts, the circuit will open and power will stop being supplied to your equipment. However, if you use a fuse that is rated for a higher amperage than what is required for your radio, it might not open, or if it does open, it might have a long delay. So, if you say your radio requires 11 amps to operate, and you use a 20 amp fuse, well, if you have a short and you get a uh, say 15 amps of current going through your system. Granted, if you have a short, it's going to be more than that. But let's just say for giggles here, let's just say you get 15 amps going through your fuse. Well, because the 15 amps is less than the 20 amps that the fuse is rated for, your radio is going to be getting 15 amps for forever. Yeah. So you always want to make sure to use a fuse that will break soon enough to where it won't cause damage to your radio, but not so low either where it's going to be popping all the time. So choose your fuse wisely. And if you look at the show notes for this episode, you're going to see one that is exactly this instance. Your and actually, really, if you think about it, a fuse really isn't designed to protect your equipment per se. It's more designed to protect the wire, okay? And by that I mean, let's say if you look at the example in the show notes, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But in this picture, it shows a number 6 gauge wire connected to a fuse, and this fuse is 200 amps. Well, a 6 gauge wire is rated for 100 amps. So if you get 150 amps pumped through the 6 gauge wire, it's going to get hot, it's going to melt, and potentially cause a fire. So you always want to make sure you use the right fuse for the right wiring, I guess is really the way that I need to explain that. So there you go. Now, there are several types of fuses that you can go with, and over the past 21 years that I've been a ham, I've learned, I've used several of them, but I've basically used inline fuses. Well, really, inline fuses is really not the way that you should go if you want the best possible installation. You really need to use like a fuse block or something like that. And the reason behind this is because when you get an inline fuse, the connections that you have to make, you have to use basically butt connectors. And a butt connection is really hard to solder. And a lot of times with a fuse holder, a pre-made fuse holder that you buy from, Mouser or what used to be Radio Shack, a lot of times the gauge wire that is used on the fuse is different from the gauge wire that you're using for your installation. And that wire gauge might be too small for your purposes. So you're going to get excess heat there. So not only do you have your two butt connectors, but you have less gauge wire, so you're going to cause heat, so you could potentially cause a fire. So that makes it not really good to use. There is other ways to do that. You can buy a fuse block, and hook one up to one side, one up to the other side. Yes, you're still going to have your splices in your wire, but you can use a terminator connector on the end of it to connect it to this fuse box. And I've used these quite a bit, and they come in several different sizes. I'm sure if you've done any kind of wire, you have the solid round ones, you have like a forked one, and you have like a spade type connector and stuff like that. The best one really to use for any type of mobile radio installation or even home radio installation is the solid round, or is the round ones. They're like the ring ones. And the reasoning behind this is because if you have a solid round one or a ring one and you stick it over your terminal and you tighten it down, you're going to have contact all the way around it. You're not going to have to worry about it slipping off or moving or coming into contact with something else unintentionally. So that's the best kind of connectors to use.
So butt connectors, yes, they do work, or the barrel connectors types, they do work. They are used a lot. So I'm not saying don't use them, but try to maybe use them in a different way than what the common thing is. There's also another type of thing that I've seen a lot here lately, and that's the blade fuses. Now, I've seen these blade fuses forever in cars and stuff. They've been using these for probably about 30 years or so now. I know in the very first truck that I had um, was right after they started using the blade connectors. And before that, they used the barrel fuses. So these blade fuses, I'm sure that you've seen them. They have the two like teeth like thing looking out of a plastic fuse, and they go into your fuse panel and go through both sides. That's how they make the contact. When it burns inside the plastic, and you're good to go. Well, on automotive fuses, they're what are called ATO style blade fuses, and that means is that they're not sealed, they're not watertight, so moisture can get in them and they can corrode on the inside, so they're not going to be as good as fuses. So if you're going to use a blade fuse, make sure that it's the ATC type of fuses. Now, again, with these type of fuses, they typically have a fuse holder with two pieces of wire coming off both sides of it, and you still have to use your butt connectors to make it, and you're still going to have your same uh, potential issues with the gauge wire as you do with the barrel type connectors. More than likely they're going to be a different size. They might be the right size as what you are using for the rest of the run, but they could potentially not be. So again, you have that same type thing. Now, if you are going to be using like a rig runner or a power distribution node or something like that, these types of ATC fuses are what are used in the rig runner. And if you have a rig runner, you're going to be connecting it probably directly to your battery, and you're going to have your high gauge wire because you're going to be running a lot of things off of this rig runner. You might have 6 ports that come out of this rig runner, and so you're going to have a higher gauge wire. So, but anyways, these fuses are what are used in the rig runner, and that's where your fuse is done. You don't necessarily need one, and I believe I've said this already. You don't necessarily need one in the one coming from your battery to the rig runner, but you do have these ATC style blade fuses in the rig runner itself on each individual circuit that comes out of the rig runner. Now, another type of uh, fuse type thing that some people use are circuit breakers. Now, there are pros and cons to these circuit breakers versus fuses, and probably the biggest one that I hear is that, okay, well, if I have a circuit breaker, I don't have to worry about buying new fuses. I don't have to worry about the smaller gauge wire coming off because more than likely you're going to be hooking it to both sides of the circuit breaker. The problem with circuit breakers is that just like fuses, they have a uh, response time, so to speak, of how fast they break the circuit. With a fuse, you have a piece of wire, and they're going to break faster than a circuit breaker will. So you will have the potential of damaging your equipment more with a circuit breaker because they take longer to break. They take more amperage to break. So whether you use circuit breakers or whether you use fuses, just make sure that you're aware of that, and I would highly suggest using the fuses over circuit breakers. Okay, so now that we've talked about the wiring and we've talked about the fuses, let's talk a little bit about how we're going to connect the wires and how we're going to run the wires, I guess. We've already talked that we're going to connect it to the battery, but the one thing that is probably the biggest, hardest thing for people to do with your power connection is go through your firewall. Much like drilling holes in the roof of your car to mount your antenna on or on your trunk or whatever. People just don't like drilling holes in cars, right? And I'm one of those. But there are ways around it, and sometimes if you look at at the firewall of your vehicle, sometimes there is a unused hole that goes through the firewall, and manufacturers typically do this so that they will be there for aftermarket stereo systems. So if you don't have an aftermarket stereo system, you're probably going to have a empty hole that you can use, and more than likely it's probably going to have a grommet already in it. So you're basically golden. You know, you can use that. If you are one of the unlucky ones and you don't have that hole, there is another place that you can look, that I've used before. I actually used on one of my trucks, actually two of my trucks, and this is typically I've seen them mostly on trucks rather than cars. A lot of times there'll be a either a already a hole there with a grommet or a punch out where you can take it out underneath either the driver's seat or the passenger seat. Now most of them I've seen has been under the driver's seat. One of the trucks that I had already had a grommet there. It was sealed. All I had to do was cut a hole in the grommet, stick the wires through, and I was done. On my 2012 truck that I had, it didn't have the grommet, but it did have the hole there, but it was covered in, it is still attached with the metal, and I just had to take a screwdriver and punch out the hole. Now, when I did do that, I still had to put a grommet in there to run the cables through so that they didn't scratch up on the side of the metal and get frayed or cut into or whatever. So those are two ways you can get through there. Those are the first two ways that I would check before you actually decide to drill into the firewall. If you don't have either one of these, then, I'm sorry. We're going to have to do like the dentist says. We're going to have to drill. If you have to drill, there are several things that you need to remember and you need to look at. Um, on most modern vehicles, there is a fresh air intake behind the hood. Sometimes this area has the windshield washer assembly or the cabin air filter. For this reason, you really should stay away from the upper side of the firewall. On diesels and most high-end vehicles, they also have a second firewall that is there to keep the engine noise down from the cabin. So that pretty much knocks out a big portion of the firewall, and basically it's towards the top, towards the center of the vehicle. Thirdly, oftentimes brake lines are attached to the engine side of the firewall directly behind the brakes. So you want to stay away from the pedals, the brake pedal, the gas pedal. So basically you're down to about a third of the firewall that's towards the outside of the vehicle on the driver's side. That's pretty much where you're going to have to put it at. The farther towards the outside of the vehicle on the driver's side is the best place to put it. And I would try and put it pretty much as high as possible as well, because you also need to think about, not putting it where it will be stepped on or crimped or something like that. So the higher the better. The farther to the left in driver's sides that are on the left side of the car is the best place to put them. However, all this being said, you need to make sure that you look on both sides of the firewall to make sure that there's nothing there before you drill. Once you've done all that and you've planned it out and you know exactly where you're going to drill at, get a drill that will cut through it nicely, that will potentially not leave sharp edges. There is a drill out there, and I will try and include a copy or a link to those type of drills in the show notes, where it'll actually drill through there and will not leave razor sharp edges on the metal. But once you've drilled, make sure that you put a appropriate size grommet in there so that you don't cause the fraying and the potential cuts in the wiring. Okay, so after we are through the firewall, the next thing that you need to think about is where you're going to run the wires. You want to make sure that your wires are out of sight. I know some people that really don't care if there's wires showing, that they, kind of run it wherever they want to do. But if you're anything like me, you don't really want to see the wires going everywhere. You want them to be hidden. You want your car to still look nice. So there are a couple ways you can do it, okay? Along the bottom of the door is the door kick plate. That plate just pops off, and underneath that plate there is a trough where there's typically other wires running. So all you have to do is take that door, the bottom kick plate off, and you can run your wires right through there. The second option you can do is to run it under the carpet. This is not as easy. It's kind of a pain in the butt sometimes to do, but it is possible to do it. And that's typically how like aftermarket stereo installers do it, as they run it under the carpet. So it is possible. But if you can, try to put it down the door frame. It's probably the easiest way to do it, and it looks the best. Now, with all that being said, you also need to pay attention on where you put it at and where the clips come down or any screws that potentially go down, because you want to make sure that you don't nick one of the wires. Because if you nick one of the wires, you can cause arcing and potentially a fire. And I actually included a picture on the show notes of something that happened just like this. The person installed it in that little chase underneath the door kick plate and caused a fire. And I've heard stories of people actually their entire car burning up because of this exact setup. So, anyways, we've talked a lot about power setups, and most of it that we've talked about has been on vehicle installations. For home installations, it's basically the same way. You're basically have the same, considerations that you have to make for wire sizes, for um, you know, potentially using like a rig runner or something like that to power all your equipment. You're going to have either a battery or a power supply that you're going to be getting your power through. You want it to basically be the same thing as if you're thinking of your car. So potentially everything that I've said, with the exception of like drilling through a firewall, is going to be used in an in-home setting as well. So we kind of didn't. And the other thing really that might differ a little bit is hiding the wires. A computer desk a lot of times is going to be messy no matter what you do. But if you take the time to, run the wires the right way and potentially, do a chase way or something like that on your desk can look very neat and all your wires can be hidden. So, but anyways, I think that about wraps up the Tech Corner. It went a whole lot longer than I thought it was going to, so I guess this episode is going to be a little bit long. So let's go ahead and move on to our Amateur Radio Club Spotlight. Okay, so for the Amateur Radio Club Spotlight of today, we are going to be talking about the Hall of Science Amateur Radio Club. You can find them at www.hosarc.org. That's basically Hall of Science Amateur Radio Club.org. Their meetings are held at the New York Hall of Science cafeteria at 4701 111th Street, Queens, New York. The meetings are open to the public, typically like every other ham meeting. They are held on the second Tuesday of the month at 7:30 p.m., with the exception of July, August, and December. They have two repeaters. One of them is up now. It is the 444.2 repeater, has a PL tone of 136.5, and it's located in Alpine, New Jersey, running under the call sign of WB2ZZO. They do have a second repeater that they're working on. It will hopefully be up soon according to their website, and it's on 145.27 with a negative offset and a PL tone of 136.5, and it's running under the call sign of KC2PXT. This club, there wasn't a whole lot of information on their website, but I really wanted to talk about this club because it really seems like a fairly neat club. They do have a lot of pictures on there of activities and stuff they do. They do field day, stuff like that. But they also have a ham coming up really soon. It's going to be on October the 9th, starting at 9 a.m. It's going to be at the Flushing Meadows Corona Park in Queens. It's going to be going from 9 a.m. till 2 p.m. You can find out additional information on their website. Admission is $5. Vendor spaces are 10.
They have a whole bunch of stuff: amateur radio, antennas, computers, software, CB antennas, consumer electronics, all sorts of stuff. They're even going to have a VE testing session like most Hamfests have. They will have a free tune-up clinic, door prizes, plenty of free parking, and they also even have a drop and shop service if you have some items that you want to sell. And I'm assuming this is probably just for club members, but if you have something to sell, members can just drop it off at the club booth, and they'll sell it for you for a small commission. So that about wraps it up for the Amateur Radio Club Spotlight. I know it was a little shorter than normal, but I wanted to make sure and mention these people, especially because of the upcoming Hamfest. So let's go ahead and move on to our upcoming events. Alrighty, so as far as upcoming events go, we have quite a few actually. We're going to go through it pretty fast, so you can find additional information about all these events and the upcoming Hamfest on the show notes at everythinghamradio.com/podcast/37. That's the number 37. So here we go. September 30th from 1:45 to 2:15 Zulu time is the NCCCRTTY sprint. On the 30th as well, from 2:30 to 3 Zulu is the NCCC sprint. From September 30th at 1400 hours to October the 2nd at 200 hours Zulu time is the YLRLDXNA YL Anniversary Contest. On October the 1st, from 0 Zulu to 2400 Zulu is the Tara PSK Rumble Contest. October 1st at 0 hours to October 2nd at 23:59 Zulu is the 15 meters SSTV Dash Contest. Also on the 2nd, from 800 Zulu on the 1st to 800 Zulu on the 2nd is the Oceania DX Contest for phone. October 1st from 1200 to October 2nd at 1200 is the WABHF phone contest. Also, same time is the TRC DX contest and the GTC CW Cup. From 1200 Zulu on October 1st to 11:59 Zulu on October 2nd is the Russian WW Digital contest. On October 1st, from 1600 Zulu to 1800 Zulu on 80 meters is the International Hell Contest, and from 900 Zulu to 1100 Zulu on the 2nd on 40 meters. On October 1st, from 1600 Zulu to 2200 Zulu on the 2nd is the California QSO Party. From 1700 Zulu to 2100 Zulu on October 1st is the Fitz Fall Slow Speed Sprint. From 600 Zulu to 1000 Zulu on October 2nd is the UBA On Contest for SSB. From 700 Zulu to 1900 Zulu on October the 2nd is the RSGB International DX Contest. From 700 to 1000 Zulu on October 3rd is the German Telegraphy Contest. From 100 to 300 Zulu on October the 4th is the ARS Spartan Sprint. 230 Zulu to 300 Zulu, October the 5th, is the Phone Fray. And 1300 Zulu to 1400 Zulu on October the 5th. 1900 Zulu to 2000 hours Zulu on October 5th as well. And 300 to 400 Zulu on October 6th is the CWOPS Mini CWT test. 1900 local time to 2300 local on October the 5th is the 432 megahertz fall sprint. From 2000 to 2100 Zulu on October the 5th is the UK EICC 80 meters contest. And the NRAU 10 meter activity contest is from 1700 Zulu to 1800 Zulu on the 6th on CW, 1800 to 1900 Zulu on the 6th for SSB, 1900 to 2000 Zulu on the 6th for FM, and 2000 to 2100 hours on the 6th for digital. On October the 6th, from 1700 to 2000 hours Zulu time, is the SARL 80 meter QSO party. October the 7th from 1:45 to 2:15. And also from, let's see, basically the same thing, NCCC RTTY Sprint from 2:30 to 3 on the 7th is the NCCC Sprint. They have that quite a bit. I'm kind of curious as to what exactly that is. Let's see, next from 0 to 7:59 Zulu on the 8th. From 1600 to 23:59 Zulu, and from 800 Zulu to 15:59 Zulu on the 9th is the Markathan RTTY contest. From 800 Zulu on the 8th to 800 Zulu on the 9th is the Oceanic DX contest for CW. 800 local time to 1400 local time on the 8th is the Microwave Fall Sprint. 1200 Zulu on the 8th to 2400 Zulu on the 9th is the SKCC Weekend Sprintathon. 1200 Zulu on the 8th to 1200 Zulu on the 9th is the Scandinavian Activity Contest on SSB. 1200 Zulu on the 8th to 2359 Zulu on the 9th is the QRP ARCI Fall QSO Party. 1600 Zulu on the 8th to 500 Zulu on the 9th, and also 1300 Zulu to 2200 Zulu on the 9th is the Pennsylvania QSO Party. And 1600 Zulu on the 8th to 600 Zulu on the 9th, and then 1400 to 2359 Zulu on the 9th is the Arizona QSO Party. 1700 Zulu to 2100 Zulu on the 8th is the Fitz Fall Unlimited Sprint. 2000 hours Zulu on the 8th to 2000 hours Zulu on the 9th is the PODXS 070 Club 160 meters Great Pumpkin Sprint. 0 hours to 400 hours on the 9th Zulu time is the North American SSB Sprint Contest. And last but not least, from 0600 to 900 hours Zulu time on October the 9th is the UBA ON contest for CW. All this information was taken from the ARRL and the WA7B in M contest calendars. So head over there, check them out, or head to the show notes. Links to each one of these contests are in the show notes. Okay, let's move on to Hamfests. Okay, so on Hamfest, October the 1st, 2016, we have the 2016 Wichita Area Hamfest in Wichita, Kansas, the ARCOS Swap Meet and Cookout in Shreveport, Louisiana, Ham Expo in Belton, just down the road from me. Sure wish I could make it down there. Unfortunately, I'm working. Sucks to work sometimes. Let's see, Last Chance Tailgate in Plymouth, Minnesota, I believe. The MBARC Fall Fest in Fishkill, New York. Red Rose Repeater Association Hamfest in Brownstown, Pennsylvania. Rock Hill Hamfest in Rock Hill, South Carolina. San Diego Hamfest in Lakeside, California. Valley Disaster Preparedness Fair in Granada Hills, California. And the Vet City Hamfest in Bowling Green, Kentucky. On October the 2nd, we have the BARC Fest in Longmont, Colorado, and the Southeast Iowa Hamfest in West Liberty, Iowa. The next weekend on this 7th is the Florida State Convention, the Melbourne Hamfest in Melbourne, Florida, Pacific Northwest VHF Society Conference in Bend, Oregon. On the 8th of October, we have the Alpena Swap in Alpena, Michigan, the Barra Fall Hamfest in Township of Washington, New Jersey, the Helena Hamfest in Helena, Alabama, Kitsap County ARC Hamfest 2016 in Bremerton, Washington. Probably butchered that name. The LaGrange Hamfest in LaGrange, Georgia. Parkersburg Wood County Hamfest in Mineral Wells, West Virginia. Randy Griffin Memorial Hamfest in Morrilton, Arkansas. Swoktoberfest 2016 in Logan, Utah. And the WCLARC's 39th Annual Hamfest in Leesville, Louisiana. And lastly, October the 9th, we have the Cara Fest 2016 in West Friendship, Maryland. The HOSARC Hamfest in Queens, New York.
Maysville Hamfest in Maysville, North Carolina, and the Sioux Falls Swamp Fest in Hubertus, Wisconsin, I guess is what that is. So that wraps up the Hamfest. Again, you can check out all the links to all these in the show notes of today's episode. Alright, so lastly, let's head on to the news. Alrighty, so in the news this past week, amateur radio credited with helping injured cyclists. Members of the Huntsville Amateur Radio Club in Alabama had a role in getting help to a Louisiana cyclist injured in a September 17th group ride in Madison County, Alabama. A representative of the sponsoring Spring City Cycling Club told WHNT Channel 19 News that a number of riders, including Brian Guerrero, fell as a motor vehicle was passing in the opposite direction. The club spokesperson said it was unlikely that the motorist caused or contributed to the accident, and an investigation continues. The club praised the action of first responders and first aid from fellow cyclists, a trauma surgeon, and a nurse. Their actions in first aid and in directly calling for mid-flight likely saved his life. Huntsville Amateur Radio Club volunteers were instrumental in coordinating the communications amongst event organizers and volunteers, emergency personnel, and law enforcement. We extend our gratitude to law enforcement, first responders, and HARC for their able and quick response to this terrible incident, the club said. Guerrero remains hospitalized in Huntsville. Thank you to WHNT Channel 19 News. That was from the ARRL news feed. Okay, so next up, last week we talked a little bit about the movement that the Amateur Radio Parity Act has passed the House, and the ARRL was urging its members to rally again by sending emails to Senate as it now goes before the Senate to go into law. On the ARRL news, this was posted. Monument building to urge Senate passage of the Amateur Radio Parity Act. The response from ARRL's call to action urging the support of U.S. Senators of the Amateur Radio Parity Act, H.R. 1301, has been gratifying, although the campaign continues. More than 50,000 emails have been sent to Capital City via Relay Congress, and all 100 U.S. Senate members have been contacted. The League continues to encourage members of the amateur radio community who have not yet done so to reach out to their two U.S. Senators seeking their support. Just where things stand with respect to the bill's future in the U.S. Senate is not entirely clear. At this moment, we have no date set for action by the Senate, said ARRL Hudson Division Director Mike Lysenko into YBB, who has been deeply involved in promoting passage of this legislation. The Senate will adjourn in September work period soon, and members will return home to campaign. If we do not achieve consideration before they go into hiatus, we will have to wait until they return after Election Day. On September 12th, the U.S. House Representative approved H.R. 1301 on a voice vote under a suspension of the rules, accumulating many years of effort by the ARRL's part to gain legislation that would enable radio amateurs living in deed-restricted communities to erect antennas to support amateur radio communication. The bill calls on the FCC to amend its Part 97 rules to, quote, prohibit the application of amateur stations of certain private land use restrictions and for other purposes, end quote. Shepherded by the ARRL, the overwhelming grassroots support for H.R. 1301 from the amateur radio community was credited to getting the bill through the U.S. House, but it faces significant obstacles to passage in the U.S. Senate. The earlier U.S. Senate version of the bill, S. 1685, no longer is in play, and the Senate is expected to vote on the version of H.R. 1301 that the House adopted this month. The vote came after ARRL worked with the Community Association Institute, which represents homeowners associations, to develop language that both organizations could support.
Rally Congress makes it easy to generate letters to senators in support of the Amateur Radio Parity Act. The entire process takes just a couple minutes. Quote, it is critical that ARRL members continue to write their senators, end quote, Lorenzo urged. To those who have already written, thank you. If you haven't done so already, please do so today. We can only do so much. After that, it becomes the responsibility of memberships to participate. According to the amended bill, pr- provides community associations should fairly administer private land use regulations in the interest of their communities while nevertheless permitting the installation and maintenance of effective outdoor amateur radio antennas. There exist antennas designs and installations that can be consistent with the aesthetic and physical characteristics of land and structure in the community association while accommodating communications in the amateur radio service. You can find more information about the Amateur Radio Parity Act on the ARRL's website. You know, this act has got a big debate. I've written several blog posts about it. I might actually do a uh, short, maybe a tech corner on this act in a later episode. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty, and the last bit of news ARRL outgoing QSL service to raise rates. On September the 22nd, this was posted on the ARRL newsfeed. Although ARRL believes it's important to maintain the long-standing tradition of the ARRL's outgoing QSL service as a member benefit, increased administration costs will require an increase in rates in order to keep the service available and viable. Quote, the service has been a member benefit for decades. Since its official formation in November 1976, tens of millions of QSL cards have been shipped from ARRL headquarters to amateur radio QSL bureaus in other national societies worldwide. At one time, this benefit offered a safe, reliable, and inexpensive way to exchange QSL cards for a fraction of the cost of the postal service. What amateur what amateurs saved in financial cost, however, was made up in time. It could take months or even years to send and receive a QSL through the Bureau, end quote, according to a ARRL statement. Effective November 1st, the rate for 1 ounce of outgoing QSLs via this service will increase to match the 1 ounce USPS international postage rates. As of September 2016, this rate was $1.15 per ounce, or about 10 cards. In addition, a service fee of $7 will be charged per individual transaction to cover administrative costs. The ARRL said QSLing is very different now, and while Postal Service is generally more reliable in the years past, international shipping costs have risen significantly. With the advent of the Internet and online QSL confirmation services such as the ARRL's Logbook of the World, fewer and fewer paper cards are being exchanged, said the ARRL. Calling the outgoing QSL service a significant tradition in the world of amateur radio, the league said it committed to keeping the tradition and service alive for members who enjoy using it. We are committed to ensuring our members will be able to send their QSL cards through the service for decades to come, said the ARRL. You know, nowadays with the way that technology is going, paper mail is going further and further to the wayside. And in a way, it's sad. It's nice to get a handwritten letter or something along those lines than it is to get an email. Sometimes an email is just so impersonal, but it's basically the same thing. Now it seems like every day when I go to the mailbox that the majority of the stuff that I get is either one, junk mail, somebody trying to sell me something, or two, bills. Not very often do I get a greeting card or a handwritten letter in the mail. And in a way, that's sad, but it's totally understandable because that's the way this world is going. So, this
QSL service. Is it viable to do? Maybe, maybe not. Um, do I think that some people maybe should get with the times? I don't think I would go that far because there is a certain appeal to getting a QSL card from somebody through the mail. And yeah, you can see the picture on your computer, if they send you one via email or something, but it's still just not the same. So kudos to the ARRL for keeping this service alive. All right, so the last news story that I'm going to talk about today is one of those things that is the reason that I got involved with amateur radio, and that's community service. According to the ARRL news feed, amateur radio volunteers on call during major Puerto Rican power outage. This was posted on September 23rd, and it reads as follows. Amateur radio volunteers went on alert following an afternoon explosion on September 21st at the Aguirre Central Power Generator in Salinas that left some 1.5 million residents without power in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. ARRL Public Information Coordinator Angel Santana, WP3GW, said that as Wednesday evenings wore on, the most sought after items were ice, followed by potable water, which depends on electricity to power the pumps that deliver it. The outage has resulted in traffic jams from non functional signal lights. The governor of Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency. On the amateur radio side, the VHF UHF linked repeater system of the Federación de Radio Aficionados de Puerto Rico. I know I probably just totally butchered that, and I am so sorry for all y'all that speak Spanish out there. An ARRL affiliate club was the main source of information, Santana told the ARRL. She goes on to say, as soon as the situation began, lots of mobile and portable stations got on the air from east to west to report the power loss, and ham radios were among the first to report the explosion, as smoke was observed soaring towards the sky. According to FEMA, the fire at Salinas Switching Station caused the island-wide power generation power plant to shut down as a safety precaution. FEMA reported on September 23rd that power has been restored to nearly 950,000 customers, with complete power restoration expected in the day. FEMA said 305,000 customers were left without drinking water due to the loss of power at pumping stations. FEMA said that all critical facilities were operating on backup generators. The airport, police stations, and water plants were expected to receive first priority as power is restored. Santana said that the eastern side of the island was covered by the 145.11 MHz repeater in Kaye, the western by a machine on 145.29, and the center by a repeater of 146.83 from the FRA. Repeaters on 70 centimeters became the main network for any emergency or healthcare traffic. A routine Wednesday VHF net made it on the air as scheduled, and most comments and messages were involved with local situations as well as information about the October 9th FRA event. Other repeater systems were on the air as part of the regular monitoring schedule, and some were active with normal conversations. On HF, Antonio Santiago, KP4IA, in Toa Alta, was on the air from his energy efficient home. Santana said that KP4IA was the main source of what's happening even before the situation got to mainland news service, checking internets on 20, 40, and 75 meters and relaying information about the situation to other amateur stations on the mainland. Santana said local schools remain closed on September 23rd, and public services were to resume at 10 a.m. as power and water services were restoring gradually. There is still Autoridad de I'm not even going to butcher that one. I'm sorry. The electric company there, customers without electricity, Santana said. Two cellular companies had problems. There are at least four. There is at least one death because of the generator emissions and a few vehicle accidents. Kudos to the police personnel for directing traffic. FEMA said untreated wastewater and sewerage was being discharged into spillways. Hospitals were running on backup generators, and buses were being used to move passengers as the light rail system is down. NASA provided a view from space showing how Puerto Rico appears at night with full power, as well as how it looked during the outage. And this picture is really neat, y'all. Y'all really need to go and check that out. It's very bottom of the show notes, and there's a link at view from space. And one of them shows the view, I believe, from the 22nd, and one of them from the 23rd, I believe, or 21st, 22nd, something like that. And there's a major difference on lights that are seen, so it's really neat. Y'all really need to check it out. But, anyways, what I was saying was is that this type of story is what amateur radio is all about, in my opinion. The major thing is public service, community service. Those are the major things, and that's what amateur radio is all about. That's why we are here. And you know, it really doesn't matter why you got into the hobby or why what you do every day in the hobby. You know, when it comes to an emergency, it's really in ways human nature for us to jump in and try and help. I mean, you see the best times of your neighborhood is when the worst happens. Just like the recent 9/11 anniversary that we had here a couple weeks ago, marking the 15th year since 9/11. And if you go back, if you're old enough to remember that, and you go back and you look during that time, and during several other major events, Katrina, um, several other hurricanes, tornadoes, the Moore tornado several years ago in Oklahoma. The community tends to come together and help each other in ways that just blow my mind sometimes. And we as amateur radio operators are no different, except for that we provide communications to everybody else. So I love reading stories about stuff like this, and it just I just love it. So, but anyways, that brings me to the end of the news. So I guess that pretty much wraps up the episode as well. So once again, I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of the Everything Ham Radio podcast. Again, you can find all the links that we've talked about, the Hamfest, the events, news stories, and everything else that I've talked about in the show notes of today's episode. That can be found at everythinghamradio.com / podcast / 37. Also, don't forget, there is today and tomorrow, the day that this episode is released, and tomorrow, for you to enter to win your Nanek 904 case. These cases are absolutely awesome, and I highly urge every one of y'all to enter to win this case. If you don't win the case, at the very least, head it over to gigaparts.com and buy you one. You get 10% off if you use the coupon code of EHR10 at checkout, and it can be applied to any Nanite case. It doesn't have to be just the 904. They have everything from a small, like 5-inch by 3-inch case, all the way up to like a suitcase style or a suitcase size, or um, something to hold your rifle in, or your drone in, or test equipment. All these different sizes you can buy from gigaparts.com. Just enter that coupon code EHR10 and you get that 10% off. So please head on over there and do that now before the coupon code expires. The deadline to enter for the free Nanite case is September the 30th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So please do that. If you haven't subscribed to my email list, You can do that very simply. There's a link on the bottom of the show notes, or you can go to everythinghamradio.com/subscribe. Fill out the information, that your name, address, call sign if you got one. Um, Click on the sign me up button. You will get an email from me with a link on there to confirm your subscription, to make sure that it was you that actually subscribed to it. I promise I will never sell, rent, or otherwise distribute your email addresses. I hate spam as much as you do, so I will never ever do that to y'all. So please subscribe to my blog. You'll get updates in your email when I publish a new blog post, or a new podcast episode. You can also follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/everythinghamradio. You can check out my YouTube page at youtube.com/everythinghamradio. I am active on Twitter at K5CLM. And I am now on iHeartRadio. I'm on Stitcher Radio. Of course, I'm on iTunes. Several different ways you can listen to this podcast, as well as directly on the website. So if you have subscribed on iTunes and you haven't done so already, please go to my iTunes page. You can go to everythinghamradio.com/iTunes to go there directly. Please give me a star rating and an honest review. It really helps me out. And yeah, I guess that's about it. Also, real quick reminder, I might be doing a little mini episode on Friday, because Friday, September the 30th, is International Podcast Day. So I might be doing just a little episode, not really like this, but so stay tuned for that. But anyways, until next time, this is K5CLM signing out. 73, y'all.